It's funny how you can live in a place, walk its floors 1,000 times, and never truly know the ground beneath your feet. For me, that realization didn't come as a gentle whisper. It came as a deep, hollow boom that vibrated up through a steel crowbar and rattled my soul. One moment, I was just a guy trying to fix a perpetually damp spot in my cellar. The next, I was standing on the precipice of a 100-year-old secret, and the air in the room suddenly felt ancient and heavy with unspoken words. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the dull thud of packed earth or the gritty scrape of stone on stone. It was a resonant, cavernous echo, the sound of a void. And in that moment, the quiet, predictable life I had so carefully built for myself shattered into a million questions. Let me back up a little. My name is Alex. I'm 34. And until about a year ago, my entire world was contained within a 50-story glass tower where I worked as a financial analyst. My days were a predictable rhythm of spreadsheets, market fluctuations, and the incessant hum of servers. I was successful, I guess, by most modern metrics. I had the apartment with the view, the high-stress job with the high-stress salary, and a profound, gnawing sense of emptiness. I was living a life that looked great on paper, but felt like an ill-fitting suit. So, I did what anyone on the verge of a quarter-life crisis with a bit of savings does. I cashed out. I quit my job, sold my apartment, and bought the crumbling 200-year-old farmhouse 300 miles from the nearest skyscraper. My friends thought I had lost my mind. My parents were cautiously supportive, which is their way of being terrified. But for me, it was a breath of fresh air after years of drowning in recycled office oxygen. The farmhouse wasn't just a building. It was a promise. It was covered in peeling paint. The porch steps groaned in protest with every step. And the plumbing was a series of optimistic and often futile pipes. But it had character. It had a soul. It stood on 5 acres of overgrown land surrounded by ancient oak trees that had seen more history than I could ever read in a book. It was perfect. My plan was simple: restore it. Not by hiring a crew of contractors, but with my own 2 hands. I wanted to feel the grain of the wood I was sanding, the weight of the stones I was resetting. I wanted to earn my place in this house, to become a part of its long story, not just a temporary occupant. For months, that's exactly what I did. I learned about plaster and lath, about mortise and tenon joints. I spent my days covered in sawdust and my evenings nursing sore muscles, feeling more alive and purposeful than I ever had staring at a stock ticker. The house slowly began to breathe again, and so did I. The cellar was my final frontier. It was a classic New England fieldstone foundation, damp and smelling of rich earth and a century of forgotten things. The previous owners had used it for storage, and it was filled with rotting shelves, mason jars filled with unidentifiable substances, and the general detritus of lives lived and left behind. My goal was to clean it out, seal the walls to deal with the dampness, and maybe turn it into a workshop. It was during this process that I found the spot. A section of the floor in the far corner, unlike the rest of the packed earth and flagstone surface, was made of thick wooden planks. They looked ancient, warped by years of moisture. It was this area that always seemed to be the dampest, and I figured there was probably some issue with drainage underneath. My plan was to pull up the planks, lay a proper vapor barrier, and put down some gravel. Simple. I wedged the tip of my crowbar into a gap between 2 of the planks and put my weight into it. There was a screech of old nails, a groan of protesting wood, and then that sound, the deep, hollow boom. I froze, the crowbar still in my hands. I tapped the wood with the steel tip. Boom, boom. It wasn't just a small space. It sounded big. My heart started hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden silence of the cellar. All the rational explanations fled my mind, replaced by a flood of wild, improbable fantasies. A prohibition-era stash? A forgotten well? Buried treasure? The romantic, story-seeking part of me that had bought the house in the first place was now in full control. With a new sense of adrenaline-fueled urgency, I worked the crowbar, prying up one plank, then another. The wood was heavy, dense oak, and it fought me every inch of the way. Finally, I managed to lift a section large enough to see into the darkness below. A wave of cool, musty air washed over my face. It was the air of a place that hadn't breathed for a very, very long time. It smelled of dry dust, decaying paper, and something else, something faintly floral like dried lavender. I grabbed my powerful work light and aimed its beam into the hole. It cut through the darkness, illuminating a small set of steep, narrow stone steps leading down. My breath hitched. This wasn't a crawl space for plumbing. This was a room, a hidden, deliberately concealed chamber. My mind was racing. Who would build this? And more importantly, why would they hide it so completely? There was no door, no obvious entrance, just the heavy oak planks I had just ripped up, which had likely been sealed for generations. I'm not a brave man by nature. In my old life, the scariest thing I faced was a quarterly earnings report. But standing there, peering into that black square, I felt a pull I couldn't resist. It was a call from the house itself, a whisper from its past. I checked the stability of the steps with my foot, and finding them solid, I took a deep breath and descended into the unknown. The room was small, no more than 10 feet by 10 feet. The walls were the same rough-hewn stone as the cellar, but the air was surprisingly dry.
The beam of my light danced across the space, revealing the spidery calligraphy of ancient cobwebs. In the center of the room sat a small, simple wooden table and a single, straight-backed chair. They were both covered in a thick blanket of pale gray dust, perfect and undisturbed, like a fresh fall of snow. It looked like a scene frozen in time, a silent tableau waiting for an actor who had left the stage a lifetime ago. And there, sitting squarely in the middle of the table, was a small, dark wooden box. It wasn't a chest. It was small, about the size of a shoebox, crafted from a dark, rich wood like mahogany or walnut. It had a simple, tarnished brass latch, but no visible lock. My light glinted off the polished surface, which was somehow less dusty than everything else, as if it had been wiped clean not too long ago, though that was impossible. I stepped closer, my boots making no sound on the packed earth floor. The silence was absolute, profound. It felt sacred, like I was trespassing in a tomb. I reached out a hesitant hand and touched the lid of the box. The wood was cool and smooth beneath my fingertips. A shiver traced its way down my spine, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. What was I doing? This was someone's private space, their secret. Did I have any right to be here, to uncover what they had so carefully hidden away? I sat there for a long time in that dusty, forgotten room, holding a stranger's entire world in my hands. I felt like an intruder, but my curiosity was a physical force, a burning need to understand. What would you have done in this situation? Would you have read on, or would you have sealed the chamber back up, leaving the secrets to rest? Let me know in the comments below. For me, there was no real choice. The story had already begun, and I had to know its end. I lifted the box. It was heavier than it looked. I carried it carefully up the stone steps, back into the familiar world of my cellar, and then up into the warmth of the kitchen. I set it on the large farmhouse table I'd spent a month restoring, the old wood of the box a dark contrast against the light, newly sanded pine. I sat down, my heart still beating a little too fast, and just looked at it. The latch was simple, a small brass hook and eye. With trembling fingers, I lifted it. The lid opened with a soft, dry sigh, the sound of air escaping after a long imprisonment. The scent of lavender and old paper filled my kitchen. Inside, nestled on what looked like faded velvet lining, was a stack of letters, tied with a delicate pale blue silk ribbon, now faded to a ghostly gray. Beside the letters lay a small leather-bound book with a worn, cracked cover, a diary, and underneath it all, a single photograph, a sepia-toned daguerreotype of a young woman. I picked up the photograph first. The woman was beautiful, but not in a conventional way.
She had large, intelligent eyes that seemed to look right through the camera, right through the century that separated us, and see me. Her hair was dark and pulled back, but a few rebellious curls had escaped to frame her face. There was a hint of a smile on her lips, but her eyes held a touch of melancholy, a deep, soulful sadness. There was no name, no date on the back, just that piercing gaze. I put the photo down gently and reached for the diary. The leather was brittle, and it felt fragile in my hands. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was exquisite, a flowing, elegant cursive that was a work of art in itself. The ink was faded from black to a rusty brown, but it was still perfectly legible. The first entry was dated June 12, 1888, and it began with a name. My name is Ilara, and this house is my whole world. Father says a woman's place is in the home, and so I have resolved to make this home my place. But some days, the world inside these walls feels so very small. I spent the rest of that night, and many nights after, completely engrossed. I abandoned my renovation work. The half-sanded floorboards and cans of paint were forgotten. My world shrank to the size of that kitchen table, to the contents of that small wooden box. I was no longer Alex, the city boy, playing at being a farmer. I was a time traveler, a silent observer of a life lived within the very same walls I now inhabited. Ilara's diary was my portal. From her words, the house came alive in a way it never had before. The creak of a floorboard upstairs wasn't just the house settling, it was the echo of her footsteps. The way the afternoon sun streamed through the west-facing window in the parlor wasn't just a pretty sight, it was the same light she had sat in while she wrote. Her early entries were filled with the quiet observations of a sheltered but brilliant mind. She wrote about the changing seasons, the book she was secretly reading against her father's wishes, her fascination with the stars. She had a poet's soul, trapped in a time and place that had little room for it. Her father was a stern, domineering man, a figure of authority who saw her as a commodity to be married off for social and financial gain. Her mother was a faded, timid presence, long worn down by her husband. Ilara's only real companion was the house and the land around it. Then, about a year into the diary, a new name appeared: Thomas. He was the son of a neighboring farmer, a family her father considered beneath them. He was hired to help with repairs on the barn. Ilara's writing, once so measured and observational, suddenly ignited with a fire I could feel from 130 years away. He does not look at me as if I am a porcelain doll to be admired on a shelf. She looks at me as if he sees the person I am, not the person I am supposed to be. When he speaks to me, it is not with the stilted pleasantries of the suitors father parades through the parlor.
He asks what I think, what I dream of. No one has ever asked me that before. The letters confirmed the story. They were from Thomas to Ilara, smuggled to her by a sympathetic kitchen maid. They were filled with the raw, heartfelt passion of a first true love. He wrote to her of his dreams of buying his own land, of building a life where they could be together, free from the judgment of her father. He called her his stargazer, and he promised her a life where she could read all the books she wanted and never have to hide her intelligence. As I read their words, a strange sort of melancholy settled over me. Here I was, a man who had fled a life of supposed connection, a world of social media and constant communication, only to find a deeper, more profound connection with two people who had been dead for over a century. Their love felt more real and vibrant than anything I'd experienced in my own life. Have you ever felt a connection to the past like that? A place or an object that seems to hold the echoes of people who came before. It's a powerful, almost haunting feeling. The secret chamber, I realized, must have been their meeting place, a place carved out of the earth, hidden from the prying eyes of her father. It was their sanctuary. I could picture them down there, in the dim lantern light, planning their future, stealing moments of happiness in a world that was trying to keep them apart. Alara's diary entries became more hopeful, more alive. They had a plan. Thomas was saving money. He had an uncle in Oregon who had promised him work and land. They were going to run away. Tonight, Thomas showed me the map she wrote, her handwriting a little shakier than usual, alive with excitement. He traced the lines with his finger, all the way across the country to a place called the Willamette Valley. He says the soil is rich and the sky is bigger than I can possibly imagine. He whispered that our future was written not in the stars I so love to watch, but on that map. And for the first time, I believe him. I believe in a future beyond this house. But as I read on, the tone began to shift. The hope was still there, but it was now threaded with a vein of fear. Her father had arranged a marriage for her to a wealthy older man from the city, a business associate. The wedding was set for the end of the summer. Their time was running out. The entries became shorter, more frantic. The letters from Thomas more urgent. They set a date, the night of the harvest moon, a month before her scheduled wedding. Thomas would have enough money saved. He would bring 2 horses and wait for her by the old oak tree at the edge of the property at midnight. She was to pack a small bag, slip out of the house, and they would ride west and never look back. The last few entries in the diary were almost unbearable to read. I felt like I was intruding on the most private, terrifying moments of her life. She wrote of her fear, but also of her resolve.
Her love for Thomas was stronger than her fear of her father, stronger than her fear of the unknown. October 14th, 1889, the night of the harvest moon. My bag is packed with the few things I cannot bear to leave: this diary, Thomas's letters, and the copy of Leaves of Grass he gifted me. My hands are shaking so much I can barely write. Every creak of the floorboard sounds like Father's footsteps. Every gust of wind sounds like my future being ripped away. But when I think of Thomas's face, of his promise of a wide-open sky, the fear subsides. It is replaced by a strength I did not know I possessed. This house has been my world, but it is also my cage. Tonight, I will fly free. My next entry will be from somewhere on the road to a new life. My hand to God, I will not fail him. And that was it. That was the last entry. The rest of the pages in the diary were blank. I sat there, stunned. The empty pages staring up at me like a silent accusation. What happened? Did she make it? Did they ride off into the sunset and live a long, happy life in Oregon? Or was she caught? I frantically untied the ribbon on the letters, my hands fumbling. I sorted through them, looking at the postmarks, the dates. They were all from Thomas to her. There were no letters from her to him. The last one was dated a week before their planned escape, full of final instructions and breathless declarations of his love. There was nothing more. The story just stopped. I felt a profound sense of loss, a grief for these 2 people I'd never met. For days, I couldn't think of anything else. The renovation was completely forgotten. I would walk through the rooms of the house, trying to imagine her life here, trying to will the walls to tell me the rest of the story. I found myself talking to her, whispering questions into the empty air. "Did you get away, Alara?" I'd ask the quiet parlor. "Did you find your wide-open sky?" The silence was my only answer. It was maddening. I couldn't leave it like this. I had to know. The romantic who had bought the house was gone, replaced by a determined historian, a detective. My quest for a simple life had become a complex investigation into the past. I started with the town archives, a dusty room in the basement of the town hall run by a woman named Eleanor, who had a memory like a steel trap. I told her I was researching the history of my house. I didn't mention the chamber or the diary, It felt too personal, too private to share. She helped me pull old property records, census data, birth and death certificates. I found Alara's family. Her father, Alistair, a man whose name appeared on half the deeds in the county. Her mother, whose first name was simply listed as Mrs. Alistair. And Alara. I found her birth certificate, 1870. And then my blood ran cold. I found her death certificate, dated October 15th, 1889. The day after she was supposed to escape.
The cause of death was listed as consumption, a common enough ailment at the time, but the timing was too coincidental, too neat. Was it true? Or was it a lie, a cover-up for a daughter who had disgraced her family by running away? My heart sank. But what about Thomas? I searched for his family name. I found them in the census records, on a small plot of land a few miles from Alara's home. And then I found his death certificate, October 14th, 1889, the night of the harvest moon, the night they were supposed to escape. Cause of death? Accident, thrown from horse. I felt the air leave my lungs. A wave of nausea washed over me. It wasn't a story of escape. It was a tragedy. He had been on his way to meet her, to start their new life, and a random, cruel twist of fate had ripped it all away. He never made it to the old oak tree. And Alara? Did she hear the news? Was she waiting for him, her bag packed, her heart full of hope, only for her world to come crashing down when he never appeared? Did she die of a sudden illness the very next day? Or did she die of a broken heart? Or was it something more sinister? Did her father, upon discovering her plan, do something to ensure she could never shame him? The official records told one story, but my heart told me another. The house felt different now. It wasn't just sad. It felt heavy with the weight of that tragedy. I would stand in Alara's room, what I assumed was her room, and feel an oppressive sorrow in the air. I had unearthed a secret, but instead of bringing peace, it had brought a deeper, more painful mystery. I returned to the hidden chamber. It felt different now, too. It was no longer a place of secret, joyful meetings. It was a tomb, a monument to a love that never had a chance. I ran my hands along the cold stone walls, thinking of them, their hopes and dreams echoing in the silence. I wondered if she came down here after she learned of Thomas's death. Did she sit in that chair, in the dark, and grieve for the life they were supposed to have? My hand brushed against a loose stone near the small, crude fireplace I hadn't paid much attention to before. Curiosity piqued. I wiggled it. It came free in my hand. Behind it, there was a small, dark cavity. My heart pounded. Reaching inside, my fingers closed around a small cloth-wrapped object. I pulled it out and unwrapped it. It was another book, smaller than the diary. A book of poetry, Leaves of Grass, the one Thomas had given her. I opened it, and a single folded piece of paper fell out. The handwriting was Alara's, but it was different. It was jagged, chaotic, the words scrawled across the page in a desperate hurry. The ink was smudged in places as if by tears. It wasn't a diary entry. It was a letter, a final, unsent letter. Thomas, my love, they told me you are gone. Father came to my room this morning, his face a mask of cold satisfaction. He told me of an accident, that your horse had thrown you.
He said God had passed judgment on our wicked plans, but I saw the truth in his eyes. He did this. I do not know how, but he is responsible. He found my packed bag. He knew I was leaving to be with you. He would rather see me dead than happy with a man he deemed unworthy. My hands were shaking as I read on. He has locked me in my room. The doctor has been called. They will say I am sick with grief, that my constitution is weak. They will bleed me and feed me laudanum until I am a ghost, but I will not let him win. I will not let him erase you. I am writing this and hiding it in your book, our book. I will hide it in our secret place. Maybe someday someone will find it and know that we existed, that we loved, that our love was not wicked but true. My Thomas, my stargazer, you promised me a wide sky. I will meet you there soon. Wait for me among the stars. Forever yours, Ilara. The weight of that discovery. It's something that will stay with me forever. It completely changed how I see this house and even my own life. It wasn't consumption or a broken heart. It was a murder hidden by time and lies. Her own father had, if not directly caused Thomas's death, then used it as an excuse to effectively imprison his daughter until she wasted away, all to protect his own pride. The sheer cruelty of it was breathtaking. I sat in that cold, dark room for hours, holding her last words in my hand. I had found the end of the story, and it was more heartbreaking than I could have ever imagined. If stories like this resonate with you, and you want to hear more about the mysteries we uncover, consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps us continue to bring these narratives to light. I didn't seal the chamber. It felt wrong to hide their story away again after Ilara had so desperately wanted it to be known. Instead, I cleaned it. I swept away the dust of a century, repaired the crumbling mortar, and carefully wiped down the table and chair. I placed the diary, the letters, and the book of poetry back in the box. I laid her final, heartbreaking letter on top. Then I placed the box back on the table right in the center. I left the chamber open. I built a new, proper staircase leading down from the cellar, and I installed a simple, soft light. It's not a workshop or a storage room. It's a memorial. I spent the rest of the year finishing the restoration of the house, but my purpose had changed. I wasn't just fixing a building anymore. I was honoring a life. In the garden, I planted a bed of lavender right outside the parlor window where she used to sit and write. In what I believe was her room, I installed a beautiful bookshelf and filled it with books of poetry and astronomy. I found myself looking up at the night sky more often, thinking of her and Thomas, hoping they had found their wide-open sky together. The house is no longer empty. It's filled with a story of love, loss, and time. And I'm just the current caretaker.
I found the peace I was looking for when I left the city, but not in the silence of the countryside. I found it in the echoes of the past, in giving a voice to a woman who had hers stolen from her. Her story deserved to be heard. Do you think I did the right thing by unearthing their story, or should some secrets be left buried? I'd love to read your thoughts and theories in the comments.